Driving the culture forward, this is Hypebeast Radio. We're sitting down with editor-in-chief of Richardson Magazine and founder of Richardson, the clothing line.
Andrew, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, excellent. We're having a panel in your apartment right now. How does this feel?
Well, it's okay.
Yeah. Awesome. So, yeah, I mean, we would just like to start from the beginning, just to get, insight on, how you got started and then pretty much just, where you are today.
Okay, cool. Well, came to New York in the late 80s, early 90s. I started working with Stephen Meisel, and through that, I worked on Madonna's sex book. And at the time, so I was a fashion stylist, and at the time there was a lot of grunge was happening, which was a very kind of low, down moment. In other words, a sort of celebration of the low key. And then, because of working with Madonna on that book, I started to do editorial that was more sexual, more provocative in that way. And as a kind of a contrast to the sort of downness of grunge. And through that, I started doing a magazine. A Japanese publisher was interested in what I was doing, and I had some scrapbooks and shit. And they asked me to publish a magazine, and so we did it. And that's how Richardson began in 1998.
And there have been 8 issues since, 1998? So it's been kind of a slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, it's been one of those things where I didn't really, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And the magazines are quite specific. And, so it was difficult to make them, and we didn't have money. We just were doing it on a lot of enthusiasm. And so, they came out, I think the first 3 came out over a 5-year period. And then I stopped doing it for about 7-8 years. And I kind of concentrated more on my fashion work and was doing a lot of that. And then, and then I don't know, after 2008, when everything seemed to slow down, I just really got in. I thought, well, let me start doing the magazine again. The magazine had kind of been going in my head the whole time, oh, that would be cool, and ideas and themes and stuff. And then I just kind of had the time again, and so then I started doing it, and I kind of did one a year for about 3 years, 4 years. And then we wanted to do this issue about America, and I wanted to get Blac Chyna for the cover, and she wasn't kind of as famous then as she is now. I wanted her for because of her body, she had this kind of new shaped body, this kind of new American idea of beauty. And, the people were talking about how Nicki Minaj had kind of got her look from her. And, she was a thing, but she wasn't as big as she is now, status-wise. And and it took 1.5 years to get her. She was not going to do it, then she was going to do it. And then she wanted to do it when the photographer couldn't do it. So it was trying to get Stephen Klein, who was the photographer we chose to do it, and her in the same room. And it took 1.5 years. And I think also for me, that's the magazine really is about that. I wasn't about to not use her and find somebody else to replace her. It was either we weren't going to do it or we were going to do it with her. And so it takes a little longer sometimes.
And you mentioned the fashion work in 2008. Was that on your own line, or was that with?
No, I was working as a stylist and a creative director. I was working for all kinds of brands and Vogue and whatever magazines and stuff. And so I'd done that for about 7-8 years. Really put all my energy into it, and kind of had to put the magazine on the back burner, because also if you're doing a magazine that's full of provocative material in a mainstream fashion world, it's can be problematic. So at some point I had to kind of cool that to sort of get in the mainstream, or to to work in mainstream fashion, and like I said, didn't really have the time. I was I was working all the time, flying all over the place, and and then 2008, the things slowed down, and so I had time.
Do you feel mainstream fashion is a bit more ready now for the type of content that Richardson Magazine covers, or just the clothing line in general?
I mean, I don't know, but I think the thing that's happened, almost like mainstream fashion has become less relevant, and it's the sort of advent of like social media and this sort of expansion of the information age means that it doesn't really, like, mainstream fashion is sort of like a much less creative environment when you look at mainstream magazines than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. And so as the sort of creative energy has stopped flowing in those magazines, people have found other things to do, like, you know, whether it's a YouTube channel or some Instagram feed or, you know, or a magazine like mine that's kind of like transformed into a brand that then we do events, we do, you know, it's just like, it's more about like the creative flow, where's the energy going? And as, I think that the mainstream sort of, it's really changing, certainly in the fashion and like magazine world, it's really become, it's just sort of like the same old soup reheated every month, and it's not really that interesting. And the, you know, I feel that like a young kid now is gonna just do their own thing, and so I've always been into editing. Like I'm into like really what I do is like edit. So I choose. I go, oh, that's interesting, or that's interesting, or I choose people to collaborate with, or whatever it is. And I think that's really changed. That there's lots of young people that are like super dynamic and almost more interesting than like big established talents. And so it's a really interesting time.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the age of information, so it's kind of like, I think Richardson kind of came about in what many people would consider like sort of like a dearth for porno mags and sex magazines and things like that with the rise of the internet. And then you guys naturally pivoted into fashion. What was that? Was that like a natural choice, like you said, the creative flow, or what was the...
I think that, you know, Richardson, we always dealt... I listened to Howard Stern a lot when I first came to New York. And Howard Stern would always have porn stars interview porn stars. And that's really one of the influences. It's pretty random, but that was one of the influences on the magazine and why we structured the interviews the way we did. And like, that's really how I ever heard who Jenna Jameson was. Because I mean, it's hard for kids to imagine, but there was a time before the internet, and Richardson started before the internet. So you know, it was like things were very compartmentalized. And you know, if you look at an artist like Richard Prince or Larry Clark or whatever, those were all kind of like our heroes in a way. And so when we got their work in the magazine and we had relationships with them, it was about presenting sex like that in a thoughtful way, less of a kind of like porn as what porn is for, but more porn as like a kind of like a punk thing, like porn is like an anti-establishment statement, and like, who is this person, why are they doing it, you know? And I think that punk, when I was a kid, punk was big, and punk was all about like sadomasochism, and it was all about using sex to kind of outrage your parents or outrage the establishment. And so I think that I use sex as a way of like provoking and antagonizing rather than trying to deliver a sexual experience, so to speak. And then I think, you know, whatever, we did a collab with Supreme, like James, who's an old friend of mine, when he used to advertise, he advertised in the magazine, and when we did the third one in like 2002, he said, oh, you know, well, let's do some t-shirts with artwork from the magazine. And I really had never thought about it, and so we did it, and we did 4 t-shirts. And so when I came to start it again in 2008, I was like, oh, we should do some t-shirts. And then we did like a coach's jacket, and I was always into like American basics, like, you know, bomber jacket, MA1, whatever. And we had following in Japan, and so we did an opening for like one of the magazines in Japan, and we just made some jackets and we just made some stuff, and as well as the t-shirts. And I was in Japan, I saw these Japanese kids like lining up with like armfuls of the stuff that we just kind of brought. And I was like, oh wow, this could, you know, we could do this. And so then that was like it kind of gave the energy to like start focusing more on making clothes. And obviously I'd worked as a designer when I was really young, and so it was like a logical thing of like my skill sets coming together and being able to like know about silhouette. We wanted things to fit in a certain way, certain shapes, and always basic stuff. And I think maybe like we went a bit OCD, like we started knitting our own fabrics because I didn't really like the French terry that was out there, and we kind of got a bit. We like really put a lot of energy into developing like a certain quality of basic, and yeah, and that and the Japanese appreciated that, and so it kind of got big in Japan, and then we got more traction here, and it began to like go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so would you consider Richardson to be like, a streetwear brand or just an extension of the magazine?
I mean, I don't know. Everyone says streetwear. It's a clothing brand. I mean, it's like it's a clothing brand, and we do like events, and we do like we're gonna do more magazines, and we did some zines, and we do all kinds of communication. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's just a sort of a. I think nowadays it's like if you've got a brand, then you can do anything that. Whatever opportunity comes along, you can either choose to take it or not, and see what you can make out of it. It seems like, how like this Renaissance man idea where you can kind of do a whole bunch of different things. Yeah. So for me, it's just applying taste and ideas to whatever it is that is the medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I read I read a good quote from you where you said something along the lines of like, if you don't have good taste, then you can't do something vulgar. But if you have good taste, then you can like kind of bend that to do something interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like I think I was referring to like Helmut Newton, who was somebody who was a big sort of legendary photographer, and he was always into like this kind of contrast of like vulgarity or like bad taste, good taste, that kind of like if you kind of know what you're doing, then you can do stuff that's like vulgar or in bad taste, and it becomes interesting or funny.
Elevated.
Elevated, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the bomber jacket that you guys did, the American Standard one that kind of looks like a toilet.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, that's basically like a friend of mine was like in an airport and was like, oh, that's a cool logo. And was like, oh, you should do something with American Standard. And so we just did it. And so we did this whole thing where basically we would like turn the sweatshirt into like a urinal or whatever, urinal, whatever you call it.
Yeah, and what's the communicate? Did you talk to American Standard and say like, hey guys, like,
no,
see, yeah, don't rather ask for forgiveness than permission in that kind of situation?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we've had issues with cease and desist stuff before, but they were like didn't really like mind.
Yeah, I think.
Hey, listen, bro, can you just chill with all this business because it's very distracting.
So about the cease and desist letter, is that kind of like a badge of honor almost for any sort of brand? Like you kind of have to transgress in order to kind of like cut your teeth in a way?
I mean, yeah, I wasn't mad about it. Like it was like it was inconvenient, but it was like we'd done a whole bunch of stuff that we kind of got away with, and then we did get clipped, and so it was like a rite of passage, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So going back to clothing and just like your early interest in, you're still interested in magazine and print. Like what inspires you about like clothing in today's time? I know we touched on that earlier, but like, do you feel like you can now take clothing to add on to the house that was print and to like just further the agenda of Richardson?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I think we're like into like the well-made like basic stuff. I feel like nowadays people. I mean, yeah, there's high fashion and all that kind of stuff, but we're more into like things that you can actually live in, things that you can kind of wear every day, and things where there's like thought put into the details or the silhouette or whatever. And then there's the whole layer of graphics that we can do stuff that's either like provocative or weird or cool or just like logos or whatever. So it's like, it's interesting to sort of, we made this kind of like foundation of like silhouette of shapes and garments with sort of consideration to the fabrics and the way they're made, and then you put your graphics on them and you communicate. So it becomes like, I mean, I think that when I was younger there wasn't really, like you say, social media, so it was like you communicated what you were into by the way you dressed or the music you listened to.
Definitely.
And I think now people have become their own small brands on social media, and but there still is a place for like dressing a certain way and supporting certain brands because you like their ethos.
Yeah.
I think it's, I think there's the difference between us and say some other streetwear brands is that we have like a kind of a philosophy. There's a reason why we do everything. Like, so any graphic, it's not just like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? It's like, it has to have like some other reason.
Right. Yeah. Because I feel like the modern day consumer is really obsessed with the logo, just because, like, as you mentioned, it can help brand their identity,
Yeah.
And then, like, adding some sort of, like, just reasoning behind it, like you do with Richardson, I think that adds like a whole new dynamic. You know what I mean? That most people don't think about.
And I think a lot of the things kind of like you wear it on your sleeve, literally, like the bomber jacket with the dominatrix contract on the back.
Yeah.
Like, it's very much like people sign on, like they know what team they're putting the jersey on for in that situation.
I mean, it kind of looked good. I mean, I think if people actually read those rules, they were like pretty extreme, but it was you just got to roll the dice, and sometimes you do something and it works, and sometimes you do something and it doesn't work. Or what we find is that we'll do something and then it will take longer than a season to resonate. So then you maybe want to revisit it in a year's time, or like you relaunch it because people recognized it as being cool or what it is.
Yeah.
So it took them a minute to get there.
What's an example of that? Like,
I don't know, stuff like we did this Teamster. We were really into like the same guy that talked to me about the American Standard thing. His father had been in a union in Chicago, and he always wore his father's like union long sleeves, which had the union crest and then the local whatever down the arm. And so we did those, and people were like, what the fuck is that? And then it took a minute, and then it became this cult thing that a lot of people then wanted us to redo. And so, or like we did this hardware shirt where we did like pretended that Richardson was like a hardware store, and that just
everywhere.
It just kind of blew up, and of course we just were like, oh well, that's got too big, let's stop doing it. Whereas maybe if we'd been a more traditional brand, we'd have just like done a hoodie, done a thing, done a cap, and like blown it out, and then it would be over in a year or whatever. But we just thought, okay, let's just pull that back and think about what else we could do with it later on. So we're sort of like, we do things, then we reintroduce them or tweak them or change them, or like, and it's, like that thing took off real quick, but like other things don't, and then suddenly there'll be like a demand for it later on, and we'll have people DMing us like, oh, can I get that? And like, so it's hard to know what is going to work and what isn't going to work.
How direct of a relate? Like, do you guys respond to those DMs? Like, do you kind of take those into consideration? Like, maybe we should bring back the hardware T-shirt next season.
I mean, it's always nice to get like DMs and stuff, but
not really.
No, I don't know. Like, maybe. I mean, sometimes you could be like, they're definitely like the hardware thing, for example. We're going to bring that back in a different way, and that probably was due to like a whole bunch of different communications that came in from outside that were like, from like, why aren't you doing these anymore, to like, oh, what was, there's something, you sort of, something like that. It's definitely good to have the interaction. I mean, we were talking about your audience of trolls, but that's less constructive but fun as well.
The comment section.
The comment section of Hypebeast is insane and funny.
No, definitely, I would agree. I feel like that's like one of the most reoccurring things that we get about like the magazine is just like the comment section.
Literally, meeting anybody that's been covered, it's kind of, I've had people that have been hesitant to sit down because they're like, look, man, I don't want to see what people have to say.
Also, I think you got to think, you definitely probably, like, I've done quite a few interviews, and I think for this one, I was definitely thinking, like, you got to really fight that urge to, like, censor yourself because of some freaking troll. And so but I think, it's funny. But I think almost like your comments are kind of like World Star Vine comp in a way, or like it's like the same sort of horror show that like World Star is in a way. That there's like this, you sort of, because some of these guys really put a lot of time into the hatred,
There's one guy that writes haikus. There's one guy that literally comments in haiku.
Yeah.
There's,
I mean, it's like we should do a zine of like all the hatred. It's
That
like
would be
hilarious.
someone a couple fashion weeks ago, someone made a button-down Oxford shirt.
Yeah.
And they
Of the comments.
sewed in abusive hypebeast comments. So it was
Really?
embroidered with criticism of the designer.
Of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Pe-
great.
people have done some pretty, like the Hundreds did one where they went back and took all of the comments that had
Yeah.
just torn them apart, and they just did, like, what are those called, like the poems where you black out
Yeah,
words that you don't want.
redact the.
Yeah, so they redacted all of like the questionable parts of the comments. So
yeah.
it was just positive, constructive feedback.
Yeah.
And they just kind of like put them all together. But yeah, it's like people do read those things, and
I mean, I think all those comments come out of a kind of self-loathing, and it's kind of fascinating. We all have a bit of self-loathing in us, and it's funny when you see that reflected in a troll, like who's basically just talking about his own self-loathing, and really kind of going in. It's kind of fun.
I think it's weird because I've met people that have been in the comment section before, and they just like they don't divulge their screen names to me because they're just I don't want you to know, man. I don't want you to know when I'm.
I mean, I think
there.
everybody has like a trolling Instagram account. That I mean,
I think-
where you can just because I mean, it is the kind of culture of positivity that it's a contrast to is pretty gross as well.
Stark. Yeah.
Well, it's just like it's almost like fascism, like this, like everything's great, like there's no real debate, and I think that's one of the things that's interesting right now is that there's not a lot of debate, like there's not a lot of if somebody has an opinion that's contrary to your opinion, there's no dialogue to try to find out what each person, there's no dialogue. It's just like no, it's like this kind of triggered SJW bullshit is like is and it sort of undermines. If you don't have a dialogue, then nothing really grows. You just end up this sort of like thinking that there's going to be some utopian future, but it just never really manifests. Because you're not actually putting in the work to like change anybody's mind.
Yeah, it's also just like so much nuance, like you said, gets lost in that kind of
Yeah.
Like,
And unfortunately we're all now in these like echo chambers where the people that are communicating with me generally are of the same mindset that I'm of. And so that's why almost like I think trolling on Hype Beast is so funny because it's like pure hatred, and there isn't that much of that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about the comment sections in general on websites. It's kind of like a remnant of the early internet because it was like you were anonymous.
Yeah,
you could just spit racial epithets at people that you never would meet, and it would never have a consequence on your life. And then like we've kept it alive. Like
I mean, World Star's still pretty good, the comments, but the World Star comments are like just fucking insane. Like it's like it's just like I don't know, people like going at each other. Yeah. Whereas
yeah, I feel like ours at least like stimulates some sort of like conversation, whether it may be like completely negative or not. Like at least they're like there's some thought into it. There are some people,
we did this thing where like we did this Chainlink thing that was nothing. It actually was to do with it. I bought a yukata, which is like a kind of kimono that was a hand painted fabric that was in this, looked a bit like a chain link.
Yeah.
And I'd always wanted to do, a lot of what we do is like from stuff that I've picked up over the last 25, 30 years. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And then it kind of surfaces and you like use it. And I think that Undercover had done a specific chain link design like the season before. And so we were like, oh, maybe we should not do it because somebody else has done something similar.
Yeah.
But then we were like, well, no, I'm going to do it because I wanted to do it for a long time and it's sort of different and whatever. And I saw in some of the comments, people were like, yeah, that's like Undercover from last season or whatever. And then you want to go like, actually, bro, it's not really. This is the whole reason why and da-da-da. But then you're like, nah, it's okay.
Yeah, if you don't get it, then you don't.
Well, not even you don't get it, but it's like, I get what you're saying. And like, but it's like, yeah, you can't really, if you start getting into like snapping back at people.
Right.
For that or for loads of other shit.
Yeah, when are you going to stop? Like,
yeah, you just end up
gonna
justifying yourself all the whole time, and it's like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And like you said, it's like if there's no nuance, if you can't really like, you can't explain to someone that's already convinced that you're just
yeah, they don't want to hear it. They'd be like, no, you're lying. That's not true. You bought that thing like, like, you know, whatever.
You don't know me.
Yeah,
you didn't
yeah.
know the creative process that went behind
Yeah, so,
that.
you know, I think we don't look at other brands and go like, oh, let's do that because that brand did that. We might look at other creative arenas and be inspired by that stuff, but we're not really like directly biting off anybody. Mm-hmm. But if somebody says that we are, then you just can't get into it.
Yeah.
Speaking of collaborations and going to other creative stuff, you guys managed to work with WorldStar.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And there was some, I think that they hadn't seen the final draft of your story that you had wrote or something like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if we should really do it, but we had done in the America issue. We'd done a piece about WorldStar, and it was somewhat critical of WorldStar. And though I love WorldStar, I mean, look at WorldStar, probably one of the sites I look at the most because it's like kind of crazy.
It's the news.
Yeah, it's the news, but it's kind of, it makes you feel ill if you go on a real long stint of it. It is depressing, but it's kind of great as well. And so I don't know, but we reckon they're cool, and so we had done that, and then I think Seymour actually knew somebody that was working there, and so we reached out to them to do a collab, and they were like, yeah, we'd do it. And then they said, can you send us a copy of the magazine we'd actually said we did an article about WorldStar, and they said, can you send us a copy of the magazine? And we were like, well, we haven't done the article yet. We're about to do it. And whatever. And they were cool, and they actually wanted to do more stuff, but we feel that sometimes you do collabs and then you just do it once and like you don't reissue it or like, but yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, I think another interesting collab that you guys did was with Magic City. Could you talk about like that?
Well, we got for that same issue, we had gone to Atlanta and spent 3 nights in Magic City photographing with this guy called Nick Waplington, and it was I've been to a few strip clubs, and it was pretty much the most sophisticated environment I'd ever been in. Like not the decor or the girls even, but just the way that the DJ paced the evening, and the way that the MC got things going, and that there was a rhythm. It wasn't just like all going all the time. It was like it went up, it went down, money was flying, then it wasn't, and then it was, and and also it's like the epicenter of Atlanta, that kind of rap game, or the whole game is going on there. And so you would see a lot of like shot callers there with their like girlfriends who look like strippers in a dress, and there'd be like $3,000-4,000 on the floor in singles, 2 girls bouncing away in front. But it was just actually about being seen to be that. So it was this kind of like really like, it was a cultural environment, as opposed to just a straight titty bar.
It's also like a rap A&R, like it's like a farm for music.
Yeah, I mean, the music was amazing. I mean, I think the music in strip clubs is amazing anyway. If you go to like Sin City in the Bronx or whatever, the DJ is brilliant. So we had done that, and then we worked with Nick to like reproduce one of the images for a T-shirt, and But yeah, that's the thing about Richardson is like you get to spend 3 nights in Magic City, or whatever, or like you get to go to all these interesting places. I mean, meeting like, I remember meeting a guy called Mark Spiegler, who was like a big porn agent, and then you go into his house, and it was like a dormitory for porn stars. There was like, I don't know, 15 porn stars living in this big house with him, and it was just an extraordinary environment to be in. And so yes, that's what I mean. I think, like I was saying to you before, that I did Richardson for the joy of it, for the pleasure, to express an idea or to self-expression. And it was never really about making money or becoming like a big business or anything. It was just like, and I was just into it. And that's probably what it's always going to be. And so it does take you into all these kind of like weird environments. And then you end up also doing stuff like turning down things that probably could make you a lot of money because you want to keep it credible. And so it's about finding this balance between credibility and commercial potential.
Yeah. So what makes you most excited about like the future for Richardson? Whether that be for like print or
selling out and making loads of money.
I think that's everyone's.
I'm joking.
About damn time.
Yeah. No, I just think it's like, it's great to have this sort of platform where all this information comes in, and then you edit it and you put it back out. And so it's like, it's like this kind of labyrinth of like you stand at, you like get an opportunity, and then that opportunity becomes something else, and then you learn something about the potential of the brand, and then you expand it and you go in different directions, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So it's like it's a constantly changing environment. It's like, and that's it's like nobody wants to do the same thing over and over again. It gets boring. So definitely, like, we're doing some events. We're doing like a big event during Fashion Week and in New York, and it'll be like insane. And it's sort of as thrilling to do that and to have this event that sort of kind of manifests the idea or the excitement that you had about it, as it is to put out a magazine, or as it is to put out some clothes, or as it is, it's like, it's just doing things that are like unusual or like atypical, that kind of break the monotony of like, the culture, and just being able to like change things.
Yeah. I think, a touchy subject for most brands is like, the idea of selling out. I wanted to know like your thoughts of that. Is that like a fear that you have like for the brand, or is that like, do you find it to be good? I know like there's some designers who like, I think Virgil actually mentioned like, the topic of selling out too as well. Like that's like the intent, or like that's like the idea, is to like present your stuff on a bigger platform to where you can like, do more stuff with it.
I mean, for me, it's definitely like it's a balance between like, yes, of course, one wants to be more financially comfortable. But I mean, for me, I also think that there's been times in my life where I had like a lot of money and times where I didn't have any money. And when I look back, I probably had the most fun when I didn't have any money. Mm-hmm. And I probably was the most frustrated and miserable when I had a lot of money. And so it's like, it doesn't really mean anything. Like, for me, I don't want to like, I believe in legacy. So I believe that when you die, whatever you did is what you're remembered for doing. And so you want to have a legacy. Mm-hmm. And so I would rather not sell out or not be stupid to do a short-term sellout, because then you kind of destroy the legacy. I don't want to destroy the legacy of what I've done. But at the same time, you also do have to make money. We have a lot of employees now, and you have to like take care of people, and so you want to be able to continue. And so sometimes you do have to compromise, but you just have to be smart about how you compromise. Mm-hmm. And and just it's a lot of belief, really. I think that there's like nobody that works for Richardson really is like from that business, from the business of say streetwear or clothing, and that sort of business aspect of it. So we sort of like making it up as we go along. Mm-hmm. And that can be like challenging, but it also keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
And like you said before we started rolling, I mean, you were saying that there's like certain people where the aspirational model is like, they show themselves in a Porsche or a Ferrari or whatever it is, and that just doesn't. Well, we don't flex in that way. No, we don't. We just try and flex tastefully.
Yeah, or like just what we do is the flex. Mm-hmm. So it's not really about, I don't think it will ever be about me in a Lamborghini or like, I would love to have one, but that's not the goal, or that's not the projection.
It's like the coolest way anyone's ever said the medium is the message, kind of.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think this is probably like a good stopping point, but before we ended, I just wanted to like get your thoughts, or like any words that you would like to say to people out there that are trying to do what you do, or like trying to start their own brand of their own, or their own print magazine of their own as well.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think it's very important that people do stuff, because that's how the culture keeps going. Yeah. And I think for the main thing for me is like, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Like, and your mistakes are as important as your successes, because they like inform your personal culture and how you progress. And so, I think, it's always just about do it and then see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, find another way to do it. And I just think it's all about persistence. Like talent, all that stuff will fail in the face of persistence. Like you have to keep going. And I mean, for me, there's been times where like, it was like, you weren't sleeping because you were stressed and whatever. And like, that's just part of it. And if that's the difference between doing it and not doing it. That if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So you have to kind of like, get it together and keep going, like regardless. You know, money, you're always going to find money. Someone's always, if you've got a good thing going, money's going to come somewhere. So don't worry about money. Just like stay with the good idea.
Perfect.
That is perfect.
All right, yeah, so that's a wrap, I think.
Awesome. Thanks.